I never thought my first wedding anniversary would end with me in handcuffs, watching my mother-in-law smile as police officers dragged me away from my own home. But that's exactly what happened on what should have been the happiest day of my married life. The party was in full swing. 50 of our closest friends and family filled our backyard, celebrating under twinkling lights and flowing champagne. I was wearing my favorite red dress, the one Mark said made me look stunning. Everything seemed perfect until Barbara, my mother-in-law, clinked her glass for attention. "Everyone, I have something serious to discuss," she announced, her voice cutting through the party chatter. I noticed her usual fake smile was gone, replaced by something darker. My grandmother's diamond necklace, worth over $50,000, has disappeared from my room, and I know exactly who took it. My heart stopped as her eyes locked onto mine. The champagne glass nearly slipped from my fingers as 50 heads turned to stare at me. This couldn't be happening. "Emma," she said my name like it was poison. "Return it now, and we might forget this unfortunate incident." Her words hung in the air like smoke, choking me. "What?" I started to defend myself, but Mark cut me off. "Emma, did you take it?" My own husband's voice was cold, distant. He wouldn't even look at me. "Mom's been telling me about missing things for months." I didn't want to believe it, but... "Are you serious?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mark, you know I would never." "The police are already on their way," Barbara announced, pulling out her phone. "I called them an hour ago. I have proof." Everything after that became a blur. The police arrived within minutes. They searched my purse, then my closet, while our anniversary guests watched in shocked silence. And then, planted in my jewelry box, they found Barbara's necklace, wrapped in one of my scarves. "That's not mine," I screamed as they handcuffed me. "I didn't put it there." "Mark, please, you know me." But Mark just stood there, arm around his mother, as I was led through our anniversary party in handcuffs. Barbara's satisfied smirk was the last thing I saw before the police car door slammed shut. What they didn't know was that this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Because tomorrow, I would return with something that would wipe those smug smiles off their faces forever. My name is Emma Chen, and this is the story of how I lost everything on my first wedding anniversary, and how I fought back to reclaim not just my freedom, but my entire life. Let me take you back to 2 years ago when I first met Mark. I was 27, working as a marketing manager at a tech company in Seattle. Life was good. I had just bought my first condo, my career was taking off, and I felt like I was finally becoming the person I wanted to be. Mark quite literally crashed into my life one rainy morning at Starbucks. He spilled his coffee all over my white blouse and spent the next 10 minutes apologetically dabbing at the stain with napkins. Looking back, I wonder if Barbara put him up to it. But at the time, all I saw was this handsome 32-year-old software developer with kind eyes and a shy smile. "Please, let me buy you dinner to make up for it," he insisted. One dinner turned into 3, then weekend dates, and soon we were inseparable. Mark was everything I thought I wanted: successful, gentle, funny. He'd bring me coffee at work, leave sweet notes in my laptop bag, and always seemed to know exactly what to say when I had a rough day. 6 months into dating, I finally met Barbara. I should have seen the warning signs that first night. "Oh, you work in marketing," she said over dinner, swirling her wine glass. "How? Nice." I always told Mark he should date someone in a more established profession. "Like my friend Jessica, she's a surgeon, you know." Mark just laughed it off. "Mom, stop," he said, but there was no real firmness in his voice. That should have been my first clue. Despite Barbara's subtle digs, Mark proposed 3 months later. It was romantic, a private dinner on a rooftop restaurant, overlooking the city lights. I said yes without hesitation. I was so in love, I ignored how quickly he wanted to set the wedding date. Just 2 months to plan everything. "Mark and I always dreamed of a spring wedding for him," Barbara announced, taking over the planning before I could even open a bridal magazine. "We'll handle everything, dear. Just show up and try not to mess anything up." The wedding was elaborate, all Barbara's choices. My simple beach wedding dreams were replaced with a grand church ceremony, 300 guests I barely knew, and a reception that felt more like a society event than a celebration of love. But I kept quiet, wanting to make everyone happy. That was my biggest mistake. Things changed the moment we returned from our honeymoon. Barbara started showing up at our condo unannounced. "Just checking on my boys," she'd say, even though it was just Mark and me. She'd rearrange our furniture, criticize my cooking, and somehow always managed to remind me that I wasn't good enough for her son. "Mark needs a proper home," she declared one day, 3 months into our marriage. "This little apartment isn't suitable. I found the perfect house in my neighborhood." Before I could object, she'd already scheduled viewings. The house she chose was beautiful. I'll admit that a restored Victorian with a wraparound porch. But it was also just 2 streets away from Barbara's home. Mark signed the papers without even asking my opinion. "Mom knows best," he said when I tried to discuss it. "Besides, she's helping with the down payment." We should be grateful. That house became my prison, though I didn't know it yet. Every decision, from the paint colors to the garden layout, had to go through Barbara. She had a key for emergencies, she said, and used it whenever she pleased. My space, my marriage, my life. Everything was slowly slipping away. And Mark? He just watched it happen, always choosing his mother's side, always telling me to be more understanding. She's just trying to help became his favorite phrase. If I only knew then what I know now, that this was all part of their plan. They didn't just want my dignity or my freedom. They wanted everything I had, everything I was. And that anniversary party? It wasn't a celebration. It was their grand finale. But sometimes, when you lose everything, you find the strength you never knew you had. The months leading up to our anniversary were like watching a slow-motion train wreck. I could see the disaster coming, but I was powerless to stop it. It started with small things. My mail began disappearing: bank statements, credit card bills, investment reports. When I mentioned it to Mark, he shrugged it off. You probably just misplaced them. You've been so forgetful lately. But I hadn't been forgetful. I'd been watching, noticing things, like how Barbara would rifle through our home office when she thought I was in the shower, or how Mark started having hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room. One Tuesday morning, I discovered I couldn't log into my online banking. The password must have changed for security reasons, Mark said, barely looking up from his laptop. I'll handle the bills this month. You don't need to worry about it. But I did worry. Especially when I found a stack of documents in Barbara's designer handbag one afternoon, papers with my signature on them. Signatures I didn't remember writing. Oh, Barbara's laugh was sharp when I confronted her. Just some house insurance papers Mark asked me to drop off. Don't tell me you're becoming paranoid, dear. The gaslighting was constant. If I questioned anything, I was paranoid. If I stood up for myself, I was hysterical. If I tried to talk to Mark privately, I was trying to drive a wedge between mother and son. My friends started drifting away. Not surprisingly, Barbara had a way of making them feel unwelcome. Do you think those people are good enough to be in our social circle? She'd ask Mark within earshot. They're so common. 2 months before our anniversary, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. I was coming back from the garden when I heard Barbara and Mark in the kitchen. Everything's ready, Barbara was saying. The papers are all signed. After next month, she won't be able to touch any of it. Are you sure this will work? Mark's voice was uncertain. Trust me, darling. By the time we're done, she'll have nothing. No money, no house, no reputation. Just like the others. Others? My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped the flower pot I was holding. What others? I started researching, digging into Barbara's past. It wasn't easy. She'd carefully curated her online presence. But late at night, in private browsing mode, I found things. Forum posts from years ago. Stories about other women, other marriages, and other accidents where money and property mysteriously changed hands. Barbara had done this before. The anniversary party was her idea, of course. She insisted on handling everything: the guest list, the catering, the decorations. I wasn't allowed to help with any of it. Just focus on looking pretty, she said with that cold smile. That's what you're good at, isn't it? The morning of the party, I caught her in my closet, near my jewelry box. She didn't see me. I'd frozen in the doorway, watching as she carefully placed something wrapped in silk inside. I should have checked what it was. I should have confronted her then and there. But I was still playing by her rules, still trying to keep the peace. That was my last mistake as Mark's wife, but it would also be Barbara's biggest mistake in her long con career. Because this time she'd chosen the wrong victim. This time she'd picked someone who wasn't going to disappear quietly. She didn't know that I'd been keeping records of my own. Every conversation, every missing document, every suspicious transaction, all carefully documented and saved in places they couldn't reach. As I stood in the police station that night, listening to their accusations, I realized something: sometimes you have to lose everything to find out how strong you are. The holding cell was cold that night. I sat on the hard bench, still in my red anniversary dress, makeup streaked with tears. The other women there looked at me with pity and curiosity. One of them, an older lady with kind eyes, shared her tissue packet. First time in here, honey, she asked. I nodded, trying to hold back fresh tears. My mother-in-law. She set me up. Barbara Winters, the woman's voice sharpened. Tall, always wearing designer clothes, fake as a $3 bill. My head snapped up. You know her. Honey, half the women in my support group know her. She's done this before. But nobody's ever been able to prove anything. That conversation changed everything. The next morning, after they released me pending investigation, I didn't go home. Instead, I went straight to the bank. My hands were shaking as I approached the teller. I'd like to check my account balance, I said, sliding over my ID. The teller's face said it all before she even spoke. I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen, but your accounts have been cleared out. All transfers were authorized with proper signatures yesterday afternoon. While I was sitting in jail, they'd taken everything. My savings, my investments, even my emergency fund. Over $200,000 gone. I stumbled out of the bank, barely making it to a nearby coffee shop before my legs gave out. That's where Sarah Chen found me. "You look like you could use this," she said, sliding a fresh coffee across the table. "I'm Sarah, former detective, current private investigator, and I've been waiting for someone like you." I stared at her business card through blurry eyes. "What do you mean?" "Barbara Winters has done this 7 times in the last 15 years. Marriage, theft, public humiliation, rinse and repeat. But she's never faced justice because no one's ever fought back." Sarah leaned forward. "Until now." "Ken?" For the next hour, Sarah laid out everything. The pattern was always the same. Barbara would find wealthy single women, use her son to marry them, slowly take control of their assets, then stage a public incident to drive them away in shame. Some moved to different states. Some had mental breakdowns. All of them lost everything. "But you," Sarah smiled. "You're different. You kept records, didn't you?" I nodded slowly. "Everything's in a secure cloud drive. Photos, recordings, documents. And I bet you never gave them access to your work laptop." Another nod. "My company laptop was in my office, untouched by their schemes. Then we've got them." Sarah's eyes gleamed. "Because I've got something, 2 statements from 3 of Barbara's previous victims. They've been too scared to come forward alone, but together." Hope flickered in my chest for the first time since the handcuffs clicked shut. "What's our next move?" "First, we document everything from last night. Then, we contact my friend at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Because this isn't just theft, it's a pattern of organized fraud." As Sarah outlined our plan, I felt something shift inside me. The fear and shame were still there, but now they were fuel for something else: determination. "One more thing," Sarah said as we left the coffee shop. "We need to move fast. Barbara usually tries to sell her victims' properties within days of driving them out." My hands clenched into fists. Not this time. This time, she picked the wrong woman to destroy. The next 48 hours were a blur of activity. Sarah moved me into a small motel somewhere safe while we built our case. The room wasn't much, but it became our war room. "First things first," Sarah said, spreading documents across the bed. "We need to prove the signatures on those transfer documents aren't yours." I opened my laptop, pulling up the photos I'd secretly taken of the papers in Barbara's bag. "Look at these dates," I pointed. "According to these, I signed over power of attorney while I was on a business trip in Chicago last month." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Can you prove you were in Chicago?" "Better," I smiled, pulling up my work calendar. I was giving a presentation to 200 people. Live streamed and recorded. That was our first break. But we needed more. I reached out to Janet, my company's manager. "Remember when you caught Barbara trying to access my computer during that dinner party?" My hands shook as I typed the email. "I need the security footage." While we waited, Sarah made calls to her FBI contact. "The pattern is crucial," she explained. "Each case alone looks like a domestic dispute. But together, it's organized crime." I finished. The next morning, everything started falling into place. Janet came through with the security footage, a clear video of Barbara attempting to download files from my work laptop. Then came the bank records, showing a pattern of small transfers building up over months. But the biggest breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria, our housekeeper, showed up at the motel with a USB drive. "I knew something wasn't right," she said, hands trembling. "So I started recording their conversations on my phone whenever I cleaned. The things they said. The recordings were damning. Barbara and Mark, planning everything. How they'd chosen me for my assets. How they'd systematically isolated me. How they'd done it before." "Found it," Sarah announced late that night, staring at her laptop. 3 properties in different states, all sold under suspicious circumstances. All former wives. I felt sick but focused. "How do we stop them from selling my house?" "Already on it," Sarah held up her phone. "My FBI contact is requesting an emergency freeze on all assets. They're building a RICO case." But we weren't done. Sarah had one more card to play. "We need to talk to the others," she said quietly. "Barbara's previous victims. Are you ready for that?" The next day, in a private room at Sarah's office, I met them. 3 women, all with stories so similar to mine it was scary. Helen, Patricia, and Michelle. All were successful before they met Mark. All were destroyed by Barbara's schemes. "Nobody believed us," Helen said, wiping tears. "Not the police, not our families. This time will be different," I promised. "This time we have proof, but I need you to testify." They were scared Barbara had threatened them all, but seeing them find their courage, watching them agree one by one to stand with me, it was powerful. We worked through the night, building our case. Every document, every recording, and every piece of evidence is carefully organized. Sarah's FBI contact was keeping tabs on Barbara and Mark, making sure they couldn't flee. "Tomorrow," Sarah said as dawn broke, "we end this." Are you ready? I looked at my reflection in the motel mirror. The scared, broken woman from the anniversary party was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone ready to fight. I'm ready, I said. It's time to take back what's mine. The morning of reckoning started with a simple text message. Sarah had arranged for Barbara and Mark to come to their lawyer's office under the pretense of finalizing the house sale. They're here, Sarah texted. Showtime. Walking into that office, head held high, I saw their faces change from smug satisfaction to shock. Barbara recovered first, her painted-on smile snapping into place. Emma, dear, she purred. Haven't you caused enough trouble? But before she could continue, the door opened again. In walked Sarah, followed by 2 FBI agents. My lawyer and Barbara's face went pale. Helen, Patricia, and Michelle. Barbara Winters, one of the agents, said, "We have some questions about a pattern of fraudulent activities across state lines." I don't know what you're talking about, she snapped, but I could see the fear in her eyes. That's when we laid out everything. The forged documents proven fake by the Chicago presentation footage, the illegal bank transfers tracked through detailed records, the security footage of her attempting to hack my work computer, Maria's recordings. But the final blow? The other wives. One by one, they told their stories. The same pattern. The same scheme. The same public humiliation. Mark's face grew paler with each testimony. Mom, his voice shook. What did you make me do? Oh, shut up, you weak fool, Barbara hissed. You knew exactly what we were doing. You're as guilty as I am. And there it was, the confession the FBI had been waiting for. Barbara Winters, Mark Chen, you're under arrest for multiple counts of fraud, theft, and conspiracy, the agent announced. Watching them being handcuffed in the same way I had been just days ago felt surreal. Barbara was still screaming threats as they led her away. Mark just looked broken. The house sale has been stopped, Sarah told me afterward. And with their confession, we can start the process of recovering your assets. But it wasn't over yet. We had one more stop to make. Later that afternoon, I stood in front of a press conference. Cameras flashed as I told my story, our story. I wanted other women to know they weren't alone and that they could fight back. To anyone who's been victimized like this, I said into the microphones, don't stay silent. Don't let shame win. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. The story exploded. News channels, social media, everywhere people were talking about the Black widow mother-in-law and her years of scams. More victims came forward. The FBI's case grew stronger by the day. And me? I got my house back, my money, my dignity. But I gained something even more valuable, my power. 6 months later, I stood in my garden, planting new roses where Barbara's pretentious orchids used to be. The house felt different now, cleaner somehow, like a fog had lifted. The trial had ended last week. Barbara got 15 years for organized fraud and conspiracy. Mark took a plea deal for 5 years. But more importantly, all their victims received justice. The FBI had managed to trace and recover most of the stolen assets from their offshore accounts. You did it, Sarah said, bringing me a coffee as I dusted dirt off my hands. She'd become more than just my investigator, she was now a close friend. How does it feel? I took a moment to think about it. Like I can finally breathe again. My phone buzzed, another message from Helen. The support group we'd started for fraud victims was growing. Women helping women, sharing stories, finding strength. Something beautiful had grown from all that pain. You know, I said. Looking around my garden, Barbara thought she was destroying me that night. But she set me free. The doorbell rang, my date had arrived. Yes, I was dating again. But this time with eyes wide open. No rush, no pressure, just an honest connection. Going somewhere special, Sarah asked, noting my outfit. Just dinner, I smiled. But this time, I'm choosing where we eat. As I grabbed my keys, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the same person who'd been handcuffed at her anniversary party. She was stronger, wiser, unafraid. Last week, I got a letter from Maria, our former housekeeper. She's in nursing school now, funded partly by the reward money from the FBI's case. You showed me we all have the power to change things, she wrote. That's the thing about hitting rock bottom, you learn who you are. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. Sometimes the worst day of your life becomes the first day of your best life. My name is Emma Chen, and yes, my first wedding anniversary ended in handcuffs. But that wasn't the end of my story, it was just the beginning. Today, I'm not a victim. I'm not even just a survivor. I'm a woman who fought back. And to any woman out there facing her own Barbara, remember this: you are stronger than you know. Your truth matters. And it's never too late to rewrite your ending. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't just getting even, it's getting better.